On this episode 21, we talk through integrations and what it looks like to do SuiteScript direct API integrations from NetSuite and other software solutions. We lightly touch on an overview of middleware and the value of those. And we also go into what the process of SuiteApp and bundles are and why to use one scenario versus the other. So if you're a software company trying to get into the NetSuite ecosystem, this is a really good conversation for you. Or if you're just someone that has NetSuite and wants to integrate to one other software system and wants to know the options, also a lot of good topics for you. So stay tuned and listen to the rest of this episode. Now we're talking about mainly integrations. And so I want to start by giving you just an overview on really what the topic is today. We're going to mostly talk about integrations where it's hosted within the NetSuite environment rather than middleware. In a future podcast episode, we'll talk more about middleware options. And I'll give you a brief description right now, just so you're aware that there's really two main approaches to take. There's the integration where it's hosted within NetSuite, and that means it's a direct API to API, and you can have that within NetSuite, or the other software that you're connecting, they can sometimes host it within their own. Not all softwares allow you to do that, but really NetSuite does allow it because it's the ERP, and that's why it's pretty common for a direct API integration like that, where the scripts and all that information is hosted within the NetSuite environment. And these are generally going to be REST APIs. It's not going to be SOAP anymore, and it's going to be really the REST API, and that's the approach that it's going to take. There's also going to be middleware options that exist out there, and we'll go into more detail on why those make sense in other scenarios too. But there's a number of them out there. There's some more generalist ones like Celigo and iPaaS, MindCloud, and there's also going to be some more specific ones like Feedonomics is going to be specific to things in the e-commerce space, or SensePass is one that's specific to the payment space. And like there's going to be options like that when we talk about middleware and that layer that sits between software. But today we're going to dive into direct API integrations with using NetSuite specifically. So that's the starting point.
That's perfect, Caleb. So as we kind of dive into this topic, what are some of the most common use cases where you see businesses leveraging these type of integrations in their business day to day?
NetSuite already has a lot of modules that solve a lot of business pain points, which is great. And there are point solutions that solve things even better because they are made specific to solve a niche scenario. And it's your business decision to make on if those point solutions are better for your business. And if they are, then you need to deal with an integration. And that's where it comes into play. You don't always have to deal with integrations. You don't have to integrate every single software that you're using. But there are times when it hits your key process areas. I would argue that most of the time integrations are needed when you've got high volume of data or data that's going back and forth on a daily basis, more than just like a once a month updates. And things like your order to cash processes, your procure to pay processes, maybe some accounting data, inventory management, multiple channels of how you're accepting orders. Let's say that you need to be able to take a PO, extract that information, and have it create a sales order. Maybe you're getting it from a large customer. EDI is another example where you've got different types of orders coming in through that method too. But really, like order management data is going to be the most common when you were talking about an integration. So an example would be, what about Amazon? Do you really want to have to CSV import each one of those orders into your NetSuite environment on a daily basis or multiple times a day so that you can fulfill the orders? The answer is no. So that's where integrations come into play when you're dealing with multiple channels like eBay, Walmart, like all these different distributors of your products, in addition to your own primary website like SuiteCommerce or BigCommerce. Well, in this case, BigCommerce would need an integration. So those are the main areas. Do you have any other ideas that you've seen, Michael?
Well, I have a question directly about when you reference selling on Walmart or eBay or Amazon. Say, for example, I'm using NetSuite and I I'm curious and I want to start branching out, am I going to need a different integration for each of those within my NetSuite environment? Or in NetSuite, is there an app? Is there a feature? Is there something I can get that essentially I plug into one time, and from there it broadcasts my product information to all those different channels?
The answer is yes. This is the argument for why middleware makes sense. Um, if you are connecting to lots of channels, then you're just one integration to NetSuite, and then the middleware is connecting to each one of them. So you're still connecting individually to the middleware, but oftentimes integrations from those channels are very like easy apps to set up within that middleware software, where it's just a few clicks and really easy configuration versus ERP integrations are more complex. There's more data. They're a little bit harder. So by reducing the number of integrations you need with your ERP using middleware, it can make a lot of sense where you've got one middleware application, you've got NetSuite, they're talking to each other. All the data that's going through the middleware is going to, with one line of communication to NetSuite, and then that middleware stems off into all the other different channels. And that's one of the arguments on why middleware makes a lot of sense when you've got multiple forms of distribution. That's an example of why Feedonomics in the BigCommerce space makes a ton of sense. But there's also times where you don't have that, and it's just a one-time integration, and they're not really related to the middleware where or very different mappings need to occur. It's not just syncing sales orders and customers where in that example of all those different channels of Walmart's, Amazon's, the data that's trying to integrate with the ERP is the same data in all those scenarios that are trying to integrate back and forth. But
Mhm.
let's say you've got like a payroll integration. Well, that's a very different set of data flow that you're going to need to map into NetSuite, whether it's a direct API with that software or using middleware. So either way, you have that level of effort to map to new records within NetSuite. So that's where more direct API integrations can make more sense, where they're more one-off integrations.
Yeah, and that's what, Caleb, that's what I've seen too, where I've seen integrations with companies using NetSuite if they're integrating, if we take the omni-channel or multi-channel selling perspective, if they're integrating with one other platform, take it maybe eBay, maybe Amazon, but it's just one. And in their next 3-year, trajectory, the plan for their business, they don't plan on expanding that. They really see eBay or Amazon, whichever it is, really as the only channel they want to extend into. That's where I've seen that. And I know we'll get more into the middleware in a different podcast episode. And I'm happy that you referenced connecting to something other than a selling channel. But let me ask you this. If somebody's technical, understands NetSuite well, how difficult is it for somebody themselves to create one of these API connections to some other software within NetSuite? What does that look like?
Let me define technical, because I've had people who are super users who call themselves technical because they can troubleshoot a script or a workflow a little bit. I would argue that that is, although semi-technical, not the level of technical that you need to do this. You need to know how to do Sweet script development, which is a JavaScript-based language, and that's the primary format. And there's different types of scripts, and you can do REST calls within scripts. And there's some techniques. So if you've done Sweet scripting, and I'm talking about more than like you can run in ChatGPT or some AI tools, and they'll make kind of a junk script that sort of does the trick, but it's not. You don't understand the architecture, like when to use a map reduce script and batching the files are scheduled and user event scripts, and like there's good practices. Okay. If someone has zero exposure to and all those things that I just said, you have no idea what that means, then I would say that you're probably not ready to build the direct API integration, because it is code. It is building scripts. But um, if someone calls themselves a NetSuite developer, they can do it. And this method, because of how large the NetSuite ecosystem is, makes it very easy to be able to find someone to staff or to modify now or into the future. And I think it's like a really good technique, because it's not a specialized knowledge that just Anchor Group has. And although like I want everybody to work with us, it's really good for someone that's trying to build an integration to know that they have a large talent pool in the event that they wanted to hire someone full time in the future, like that it's a skill that is able to be hired off of the market. So it is a skill that's available, but not most NetSuite admins, I would say almost all of them, are not SuiteScript developers. They know how to do administrative things, maybe build workflows.
Yeah,
So
that's an important distinction to understand the difference between those, and defining what technical actually means is a good idea when we enter this conversation.
yeah,
That
most
for sure.
NetSuite customers, they are like, "Oh, I'll just hire a NetSuite admin who can do everything we need." And it's like, well, that's not really the right perspective. And oftentimes when people in the NetSuite ecosystem and NetSuite admin or a developer or anybody who's experienced in the ecosystem hear that, they're like, "Oh boy, we've got a lot of expectations to correct." Because if you think that one admin's going to have all those skill sets and that it's just one resource to hire to solve all those pain points and be able to optimize, then like they're in for a rude awakening. It's definitely multiple. And most admins know that of themselves. They may know how to like do some light debugging and like read the code a little bit, but it's a different skill set. It's very rare to have someone who's techno-functional, which is what I describe as someone who's very good at the functional and can write really good SuiteScript too.
So let me ask you this. How long do you think it takes somebody to become, as you said, techno-functional? Say, hey, we got somebody on our team, um, and we want an internal resource long term to be able to do this stuff in the future. How long is that process going to take until they become dangerous with those techno-functional skills?
Well, the functional side is going to be what are all the native processes that exist within NetSuite and all the modules. The amount of time it takes and the number of iterations that you have to get through. In order to be fully um, a very good functional resource, you can't just have been a NetSuite admin at companies. You have to be a NetSuite consultant because you don't get the exposure and the volume that you need. Um, 2 years as a functional consultant in the NetSuite space is like 8 years as an admin worth of like experience and exposure to do the different processes. I don't know, maybe that's like a rough ballpark, but it's in that realm of you talk to an admin and then they become a consultant and they're like, wow, this is a whole new level of like being flooded with all the different experience, the use cases that exist. You have so many of those. And then to know all of those modules, the dozens of modules and native features very well for good solution design, and to also know sweet scripting on top of that, I don't know, good solid decade before you become a really good techno-functional consultant. You can know some light sweet script and know some of the functional areas of the core NetSuite processes like order to cash and procure to pay, but you're not going to know all of the modules very well in addition to the sweet script without at least a decade of experience.
That's good.
And I
I
would
mean,
argue
that's good
probably a
perspective.
decade of experience in the consulting space, not as an admin.
Yeah, that's good perspective. And I mean, and in consulting, you see so many different companies, and everybody's NetSuite is set up different and different goals, different needs. So that makes sense. Now, how long would it take? And I know right now we're speaking about developing something that currently does not exist, right? We know there's
Sure.
pre-built things that you can get, and we can get into that in a second. But if we know it's going to take an internal team member years to figure out how to do this stuff on their own, and of course with training and that sort of thing, but experience seems like the big one there. If it's going to take them years, how long is it going to take a consulting company, whether that be Anchor Group or, as you mentioned, the NetSuite pool is wide, right? Far and wide. How long is it going to take to implement, say, like a standard vanilla integration that doesn't already exist within the NetSuite ecosystem? And I know this isn't a very specific question, but if we just take, just kind of like a vanilla standard integration, not too complex, not dealing with too many customizations, but dealing with mostly native features in NetSuite, how long does that take to develop?
Let me give a little clarity for your question. It doesn't take years for someone to build integration if they have like light development experience. It just takes years to do it very well and to understand all the considerations and impacts to the rest of NetSuite and the ERP system on what you're doing. Um, having really good solution design and high quality work requires that extra expertise across the functional systems. The technical ability, like if you know NetSuite or if you know development and in general, like you can pick that up relatively quickly. But it's to do it very well requires the rest of the functional knowledge to have high quality work that isn't going to create downstream impacts that maybe are foreseeable by others. Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to like clarify that. But in general, a NetSuite integration has a few different phases. The first part is finalizing the solution design. This is looking at each of the record types. And what I mean by that is NetSuite has different record types, like a customer record. And then there's a contact record. There is a sales order record. Different transaction types are different record types. So there's a sales order, an invoice. Well, a payment record against the invoice. Well, a cash sale associated to the sales order. These are all different transaction types. And when you're building an integration, you need to do a mapping exercise for the record types, not just the fields that are required. That can be done a little bit after. But the first step is just outlining the core process areas. E-commerce tends to be some of the more complicated because you've got many record types. They're like, oh, I just need items and sales orders. And when someone says that, I try and be respectful, but in my head, I'm chuckling a little bit. I'm like, you definitely need more than that. So we've got to take a step back and help map these out, because let's say you're a B2B e-commerce. You've got a customer record. You might have a contact associated with them. That's another piece of data. You have item data, probably sourcing from NetSuite, pushing to BigCommerce. And then you've got the sales order. You've also got a cash sale associated to the sales order for when a credit card purchase is made. You want to be able to make a cash sale against it. You also got a scenario in the B2B edition where if someone, if they pay by invoice rather than a credit card, there's logic that in the integration where you need to say, create a sales order, but without a cash sale because this customer is on terms. So with the integration, you'll be passing along whether terms are established. And then you've got the invoice gets generated out of NetSuite. So you've got the invoice sending from NetSuite to BigCommerce. They pay the invoice via my account. So you've got the payment record that needs to come back from BigCommerce into NetSuite to have it reconciled. And there's probably a few other data points that I'm like not even thinking. Oh, you've also got when the inventory, you got to pass an update for the inventory after the sales order comes into NetSuite. You've got the core item data for your product feed, but you got to update the inventory after the quantity has been committed when the sales order gets created. So there's a number of flows in e-commerce that people often don't think about that is important to like spend that time outlining at the beginning of the process, get full alignment, and then it's data mapping. Then we'll do some data mapping of the specific fields. Then we'll pass it along to our developers. So actually, we have a functional consultant do all of that work because they're able to have better consideration on the impacts of the business and know the accounting impacts. They'll take all that success criteria, pass it along to our developer, and then they'll go develop the scripts according to those specs. And that's where they'll get all the work done, create the handshake, create the handshake between NetSuite and that software. So end to end, that process, I don't know, takes anywhere for a more complicated one on e-commerce, like 4 months. If I were to just say, hey, I'm just going to do an item feed from NetSuite to another software system, that's under a month of definitely, and timeline, way under a month of level of effort. But in timeline, those iterations that you normally would go through takes about that span of time.
Interesting. That's good insight. I know NetSuite has this SuiteApp ecosystem. So when we talk about these different integrations, how does the SuiteApp ecosystem play into all this? Are each of those their own integration, or how does that play into this?
SuiteApps are sometimes separate applications with an integration to NetSuite. Sometimes they are apps that are built within NetSuite entirely. The classification would be hybrid, or that would be like a scenario where it's integrated. So there's actually another technique that prior to SuiteApp, you have to go through a pretty lengthy approval process if you get into it. And oftentimes I recommend for someone trying to get into the NetSuite ecosystem, like if there's a software company trying to create an integration with NetSuite in general and offer it and kind of get into the market, I actually recommend to like not dealing with the politics of getting into um, a like into that marketplace. It's really just a website where it's listed. It's more of a marketing play more than anything. But if you want
Yeah,
to be able
it's a true
to,
marketplace. Yeah.
it's a true marketplace where people can find you. Like a lead gen. I would
Right.
argue that SuiteApp, there's other benefits. You can push updates and things like that. There are benefits, but it's the biggest value for a software company. It is a lookup, a product listing page where they can look up apps. It's a lead generation source. But you can still accomplish the goal of being able to integrate with NetSuite and have like an easy app for people to install using what's called bundles in general. And those can be searched within a NetSuite environment. I, as a NetSuite user, can look for different bundles that people have made and it'll show the author of them and like install it if I have been provisioned it or if it's been public. So there is a way, and a bundle is just a collection of fields and scripts and records. And this is how people can build apps in general. It's just like the building blocks within NetSuite. And for instance, we've built bundles for like integrations with other like payment processors, for instance. We'll create those as bundles because there's a lot of different transaction types that are being impacted, lots of different fields. And that means that all we have to do is install the bundle within the NetSuite environment for the customer at the end of the day and establish the API connection. But it's much faster than developing from scratch. And if you're trying to get into the NetSuite ecosystem, I pretty much always go this approach first to get something into the ecosystem so that you have something that you can demonstrate to NetSuite customers that, yes, I have a NetSuite integration. I even have a NetSuite demo environment. And so we'll help like our clients through this, that software companies that want to integrate with NetSuite, we'll build it. We'll help get them all set up with demo environments so that we can be able to help them guide through actually demoing it to their customers. And that way there's evidence that it actually works and that it's already pre-built, because NetSuite customers are rightfully so hesitant when people say, of course we do that.
That's right. The proof is in the pudding, right? And I like that idea. That's a great way to get an MVP product essentially out there so that you can start iterating upon it, learning from it, and, proof of concept in a lot of ways. And if it is
Hmm.
of quality enough, you can start using it. And then, of course, update it as needed. But I just want to clarify what you said, Caleb, is that if you go that route, right, it's a great way to get started, but you can't automatically push updates over time. And what it sounds like is in order to be within the SuiteApp ecosystem, to be within that marketplace, there are some more requirements for that. So if I think about this, looking at a SuiteApp, you do get some assurances that, okay, these apps are going to be managed. They can push updates directly to my environment. So on the management side, from the merchant perspective, am I right in assuming, Caleb, that there might be you won't need quite as much time to manage those Suite apps if they're from the SuiteApp environment? Am I correct in that, or is that misaligned, not right?
Well, in order to maintain your SuiteApp credentials, you actually have to do a lot of maintenance to your SuiteApp. Versus a bundle, it's a manual. It's like whenever you need to do an update, it's not being pushed automatically. The end user would have to click the update button within their NetSuite environment. So as such, there's no like there's not a certain process that you have to adhere to in order to create a bundle. There is a process you have to adhere to create a SuiteApp, and but the way they're built and the components of them are very similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important for people to understand, is like genuinely very similar.
Hmm.
Whatever route, whatever the back end processes are, where where it's stored and all that, very similar. But honestly, as you just mentioned, if it is built a bundle way and somebody just needs to go into their environment and make a couple clicks to update it, for most super users out there, that's not going to be too time consuming. And so either option seems like it can be a good option for merchants looking for some of these integrations.
Yeah, and an example of maintenance, if you go the SuiteApp route, I know people who have SuiteApps that every release of NetSuite, they have to go through a process, and they spend about a month, twice a year, just running updates. That's a lot of labor of maintenance twice a year just to have a SuiteApp, and that's why that's another reason why I say go the bundle route, because you don't have to do those same processes. You can just perform updates on a case by case basis or for a specific customer. And it just makes more sense when you're trying to a go to market strategy with the bundle approach versus a SuiteApp. Long term, SuiteApp makes sense, and I get it, but it's better to take it in phases, understand the ecosystem before you go all in there.
Yeah. Now, Caleb, I know one thing that you and I always talk about is that everybody's NetSuite ecosystem is similar, but at the same time, all of them are different from one another. So when we talk about bundles and integrations, let's, as we focus more on the pre-built integrations, how customizable are these? Right? Because we know we can create a bundle. Let's take this bundle example. We can create that for, the average NetSuite user, the average NetSuite environment. But if there needs to be customization, how hard is that, or how easy is that to make part of that bundle to get that integration to work the way it should?
Well, if you're going the bundle route, in the process, there's like you're going through a bundling configuration. What are all the fields and all the scripts? And you can the host, whoever is building, the author of the bundle, can decide which elements are locked or unlocked. So you can say unlock the script so people can modify it, or lock it. So that is like a setting that the author of the bundle does. Let's say let's forget the bundle for a minute. Let's say I'm just an end user customer of NetSuite and I have to just build a single Suite script. I don't have to bundle it. I can just build a Suite script that does that one thing. And of course, it's very customizable. You have full access to the code. The APIs of NetSuite are some of the most robust ones out there that I've noticed, at least from how many areas it connects to. There's so many record types. We can even surface our own custom API endpoints, which is pretty neat too. And there's a lot that you can do that I haven't run into issues. It's always the other software. If there's an issue with an API, it's always the other software we're connecting to, not NetSuite's APIs.
So that's good to know. And from there, are you able to really manage throttle up or throttle down the flow volume? How quick data is flowing between them, or what dials or what abilities do you have to manage the flow of data between these platforms via the integration?
Well, the flow and frequency is, you can set things at like a 15-minute mark if it's a scheduled or on an event basis or a webhook, and you can have it directly a live integration in that sense. So that flow of data and the timing is an important conversation. But the volume of data, you can do really any volume. I don't really run into many issues. There is concurrency limits and things that you do have to consider when doing massive volumes of integrations with all at the same time. I would say your core operations, you give priority to consume up that bandwidth, things that are like sales orders. But there's some integrations that could be scheduled for the middle of the night to not take up that bandwidth, those lanes in the highway that you get with your NetSuite licensing. And you can purchase additional licensing from NetSuite called Suite Cloud Plus licenses that help free it up a bit more and give you more lanes in the highway. If you're doing tons of data at a given point, if you got rush hour of data at a particular moment in time. Otherwise, and you should make good decisions when you're deciding the timing of all your integrations to say, does this particular flow need to happen live? Can it be every 15 minutes? Could it run this particular flow just in the middle of the night? And making those decisions with all your integrations are important to make because they'll compound over many years. And if you're making good decisions on that timing, then you shouldn't run into substantial issues.
I love that analogy, lanes in the highway. Makes a lot of sense, especially as we think about merchants that have to deal with the traffic of Black Friday shopping or Cyber Monday, right? They're going to need a lot of lanes. And so some of those, being able to strategically manage the flow of data, I mean, that can become your superpower if you're a business and Black Friday or Cyber Monday is going to be wild for you.
Side note related to lanes on the highway is I grew up in a very small town, less than 4,000 people, and we had like one or two stoplights in the whole town, and it was it was quite an adjustment as I grew older, and like we're able just driving in a highway with more than like two lanes. I remember it just very intimidating when I was first learning how to drive, having to do that. It was total tangent, but little something if you didn't know that about me.
I mean, it is. I agree with you. It's wild when you go from like 2-lane roads. Next thing you know, you're driving on like a 5-lane interstate or something. Different
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. But I think that'll pretty much wrap it up on this podcast episode. I think that we went through a lot of information, and this is a kind of a technical and can be confusing of a topic for some people. In cases where there's just people that just need to talk to someone, they can always reach out to us because we'll walk them through the different scenarios. First, we'll like hear what they're trying to achieve so that they don't have to get confused with the clutter of things and different topics that maybe aren't relevant to them, because we're covering like very broad topics, and it can be hard for people to understand them. And when there's like information not related to the thing that they need most, and just having a conversation one-on-one, reaching out directly helps us directly address their specific problem without getting confused with all the rest of the noise. So I'd encourage people, if they need to talk about this conversation on integrations, that they reach out. So that's it for today. Thanks for all your questions, Michael, and we'll see you on the next one.